My son handed me an eviction notice at my own front door, smiled, and said, "Mom, you need to find a nursing home by Friday." I ripped the paper and threw it at his ungrateful face. That's when he called the police on his own mother. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how a mother who sold everything to save her dying son ended up being treated like a criminal by the very child she rescued. My name is Eleanor Vance, and 3 days ago I discovered that sacrifice and stupidity often look identical from the outside. "Michael, what is this?" I asked, holding the official document with shaking hands. His 35-year-old son stood on the porch of what used to be my house, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. "It's exactly what it says, Mom. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." His voice was cold, clinical, like he was discussing the weather instead of throwing his own mother into the street. I stared at him, searching for any trace of the boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything for just 2 years ago. "This is my house, Michael. Actually, it's not." He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through something. "The deed was transferred to me 18 months ago when you couldn't make the payments anymore. Remember?" Of course I remembered. How could I forget selling my childhood home, my car, and emptying my retirement account to pay for his cancer treatment? How could I forget moving into his spare bedroom like some charity case while he recovered? "But you're better now," I said, gesturing helplessly. The doctor said a lot of things. Michael's expression didn't change. But medical bills don't disappear just because someone gets healthy. "I need to sell this place to cover the remaining debt. Where am I supposed to go?" He shrugged. "That's not really my problem anymore. You're 62, Mom. Social services can help you find an assisted living facility." I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart. That had been breaking slowly for months as Michael became increasingly distant, despite his recovery. This was something deeper, something that sounded like the last thread of my maternal instinct snapping. "After everything I did for you," my voice came out as a whisper. "I never asked you to bankrupt yourself," he replied, checking his watch like he had somewhere important to be. "That was your choice." That's when I threw the paper at him. That's when he pulled out his phone and called 911, telling them his unstable, elderly mother was having some kind of breakdown and might be dangerous. 2 hours later, I was standing in the parking lot of the Riverside Motel with a single suitcase and $247 in my checking account, watching my son drive away in his BMW. The same BMW I'd helped him buy 6 months ago with what I thought was the last of my savings. The room smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams. The carpet had stains that told stories I didn't want to know, and the air conditioning sounded like it was dying a slow, mechanical death. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to figure out how my life had become this small. Tomorrow, I'd have to start looking for somewhere permanent to live. Tomorrow, I'd have to swallow my pride and visit social services like Michael suggested. Tomorrow, I'd have to accept that the son I'd raised had become someone I didn't recognize. But tonight, I was just angry. Angry at Michael for his cruelty, angry at myself for being so naive, angry at a world where doing the right thing apparently made you the fool. I was still angry when someone knocked on my door at 9:47 p.m. Through the peephole, I saw a man in an expensive suit holding a briefcase and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. At 62, I'd learned to trust my instincts about people. And this man radiated the kind of confidence that comes with bad news and good lawyers. "Mrs. Thompson, my name is Arthur Sterling. I'm an attorney with the State Insurance Fraud Division." He held up an official-looking badge. "I need to speak with you about your son." I opened the door but kept the chain latched. "If Michael sent you, ma'am, your son doesn't know I'm here. In fact, it's crucial that he doesn't find out about this conversation." "Mister?" Patterson glanced around the motel corridor like he expected someone to be watching. "May I come in?" Something in his tone made me step back and let him enter. He looked around the shabby room with the kind of careful observation that suggested he'd seen worse, but not by much. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to sit down for this. I'm fine standing. After the day I'd had, sitting felt like surrender. Mr. Patterson opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "We've been investigating a sophisticated insurance fraud scheme for the past 6 months. Your son is at the center of it." I felt the floor shift under my feet. That's impossible. Michael had cancer. He needed treatment. I paid for... "Ma'am, your son has been in complete remission for 2 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. I did sit down then, hard on the edge of the bed. "What are you talking about?" According to his medical records, Julian Vance's cancer was successfully treated and eliminated by March of 2023. He's been healthy ever since. Mr. Patterson's voice was gentle but relentless. "The treatments you've been funding for the past 1.5 years, they never happened." I stared at him, my mind refusing to process what he was saying. "But the bills, the appointments, he was so weak after the chemotherapy sessions." "Mrs. Thompson, there were no chemotherapy sessions. Your son has been filing fraudulent insurance claims for non-existent treatments while simultaneously collecting money from you for the same fake procedures." He pulled out a spreadsheet covered in numbers. "Our investigation shows he's collected over $800,000 from this scheme." The room spun around me. $800,000? I thought about my empty bank account, my sold house, my non-existent retirement. I thought about all those times Michael looked so tired after his treatments. How grateful he seemed when I'd write another check. "How is that possible?" I whispered. "It's more common than you'd think." Family members rarely question medical expenses, especially when they believe their loved one's life is at stake. Mr. Patterson sat down in the room's single chair. "Your son is very clever. He created fake billing statements, forged doctor signatures, even had a friend pose as a nurse to call you with updates." I remembered those calls. Sarah, the sweet-voiced nurse who always thanked me for being such a supportive mother, who always seemed to call right when I was having second thoughts about writing another check. But I saw him getting weaker. He lost weight. He looked sick. "Performance, Mrs. Thompson, and probably some help from over-the-counter medications to create symptoms. Weight loss, fatigue, nausea, they're all easily faked if someone is motivated enough." The anger I'd felt earlier was nothing compared to what rose in me now. This wasn't just betrayal. This was calculated, systematic evil, performed by someone who'd called me mom for 35 years. "What do you need from me?" My voice sounded strange in my own ears, flat and cold. "Your testimony, your financial records, your help in building a case that will put him in prison for a very long time." Mr. Patterson leaned forward. "But I need to warn you. This won't be easy. He's your son. Are you prepared for what comes next?" I looked around the motel room, at my single suitcase, at the life Michael had reduced me to while living in luxury on my stolen money. I thought about the house I'd inherited from my parents, sold to save a son who was never in danger. "Mr. Patterson," I said quietly, "I spent 62 years being a good mother. It's time I learned how to be a dangerous one." 6 months earlier, I'd been living in the house where I was born, making plans for a retirement filled with garden clubs and grandchildren I'd never have. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning while I was watering my tomatoes. "Mom, I need you to sit down." Michael's voice had been shaky, uncertain. "It's cancer." I remember dropping the phone into the tomato plants and having to fish it out while he waited. "What kind? Where? How bad?" "Aggressive lymphoma. Stage 3. The oncologist says I need to start treatment immediately." But his voice broke. "Mom, I can't afford this." "My insurance will cover some of it, But the experimental treatments, the specialists, I'm looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. That night, I'd lay awake doing math in my head. My retirement account had $180,000. The house was worth maybe $320,000 if I was lucky. It would be enough. It had to be enough. Now, sitting in Mr. Patterson's law office 3 days after our motel meeting, I watched him spread out documents that told a very different story. Bank statements, medical records, insurance claims, all painting a picture of deception so elaborate it took my breath away. "The fake medical bill started here," he said, pointing to a document dated 8 months ago. "Notice the letterhead looks authentic, but the address is for a mail forwarding service. Your son was creating these on his computer." I studied the paper. It looked exactly like the dozens of others I'd received and paid without question. "How did you catch him?" Insurance companies have gotten very sophisticated about fraud detection. When someone files claims for experimental treatments that cost $50,000 a month, they investigate. Mr. Patterson pulled out another folder. Michael got greedy. He was billing for procedures that don't exist, medications that haven't been approved, even claiming treatment at facilities that don't treat his supposed type of cancer. But what about the insurance money? Why wasn't that enough? Because there was no insurance money, Mrs. Thompson. He was filing the claims, but they were all being rejected or flagged for investigation. The only real money coming in was from you. I felt sick, so every dollar I gave him went straight into his personal accounts. He's been living very well, while you sacrificed everything. Mr. Patterson showed me bank statements that made my head spin. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, a luxury apartment I'd never seen. Where was he living when I thought he was staying with me? He has a penthouse downtown, been living there for over a year. The spare bedroom story was just another lie to keep you from getting suspicious about his lifestyle. I thought about all those nights I'd worried about him, lying in what I thought was his guest room, listening for signs that he might need help during the night. All those mornings I'd made him breakfast before his fake appointments. "Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Patterson said gently, "I need to ask you some difficult questions. Did you ever see your son actually receive treatment? Did you go to any appointments with him?" He said the chemotherapy made him too sick for visitors, that the clinic had strict policies about family members. I closed my eyes, remembering how reasonable it had all sounded. He said he didn't want me to see him that week. "And the physical symptoms you noticed?" He looked terrible, pale, thin, exhausted. His hair started falling out around month 3 of treatment. I paused. Wait, his hair was probably shaved off deliberately. The rest could be achieved with makeup, diet pills, and acting. Mr. Patterson's expression was grim. "Your son put on a performance that lasted 18 months. That takes planning and commitment." The rage building inside me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. This wasn't just theft. This was psychological torture performed by someone who was supposed to love me. What happens now? "We're prepared to offer your son a deal. Full restitution to you, plus prison time, but we need your complete cooperation." Mr. Patterson leaned back in his chair. "Are you prepared to testify against your own son?" I thought about the house I'd sold to save a life that was never in danger. I thought about the retirement I'd sacrificed for treatments that never happened. I thought about lying awake nights terrified that my child might die while he was living in luxury on my stolen money. "Mr. Patterson," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt, "I'm not testifying against my son. I'm testifying for justice, and I want every penny back, plus interest." The confrontation happened at Michael's penthouse, which I'd never seen, despite supposedly living with him for over a year. Mr. Patterson had arranged for me to wear a wire, though he warned me that anything Michael said could be used against him in court. "I don't care about his legal troubles," I told the attorney. "I care about looking him in the eye when he realizes I know the truth." The building was exactly the kind of place I dreamed of living in retirement. glass and steel reaching toward the sky, with a doorman who looked like he'd been hired from central casting. The elevator to the 23rd floor was probably worth more than my car had been. Michael answered the door in silk pajamas and a cashmere robe. At 10 a.m. on a Thursday, he looked healthy, rested, and completely shocked to see me. "Mom, how did you find out where I live?" Funny thing about lies, sweetheart. They have a way of unraveling. I pushed past him into the apartment, and my breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the river. The furniture looked like it belonged in a magazine. Art hung on the walls that probably cost more than I'd made in a year. "This is nice," I said, running my finger along a marble countertop that stretched the length of the kitchen. "Must have cost a fortune to furnish." "Mom, I can explain." Can you explain how someone undergoing chemotherapy affords a place like this?" I turned to face him, and for the first time in 18 months, I saw fear in his eyes. "Can you explain how someone dying of cancer has the energy to maintain a penthouse apartment?" Michael's face went through several expressions before settling on defensive anger. "I don't know what you're implying." "But I'm not implying anything, Michael. I'm stating facts." I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo. "Mr. Patterson had given me Michael at an expensive restaurant just last week, laughing with friends, looking like the picture of health. This was taken during your supposed chemotherapy week." He stared at the photo, and I watched his mind work, calculating whether he could talk his way out of this. "Mom, I can explain everything. Sometimes I have good days and—" "Stop." My voice was sharper than I'd ever used with him before. "Just stop lying to me. I know about the fake medical bills. I know about the insurance fraud. I know you've been healthy for 2 years. The color drained from his face. From his... "Who told you that? Does it matter?" "What matters is that you stole my entire life savings to fund this." I gestured around the apartment. "You stole my house, my retirement, my future, all while pretending to be dying." Michael sank onto his leather sofa. "The one that probably cost more than I'd had in my checking account when he kicked me out. You don't understand. I was going to pay you back." "With what money?" "The insurance settlements that don't exist, or were you planning to keep the fraud going indefinitely?" "It wasn't supposed to go this far." His voice was small now, like a child caught stealing. "It started as just borrowing money until I could get back on my feet after the real diagnosis. But then the real diagnosis, I felt the world tilt again. You did have cancer, a small tumor, caught early, removed completely 2 years ago." He couldn't meet my eyes, but the medical bills were still expensive, and I'd been laid off. And I thought if I just exaggerated the severity for a few months, I stared at my son, this stranger who'd systematically destroyed my life for his convenience. "So you decided to pretend you were dying?" "I never meant for it to go on so long, but you were so willing to help, and the money made everything easier. And I told myself I'd pay it all back once I got another good job. Instead, you got comfortable living off your mother's sacrifice." Michael stood up, pacing to the window. "You have to understand, I was scared. Scared of being poor, scared of losing everything. When you offered to help, it felt like a lifeline. I offered to help my dying son. You took advantage of a mother's love to fund a lifestyle you hadn't earned. What do you want from me?" He turned back to me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in his face. Genuine fear of consequences. "I want my money back. All of it. Plus interest for the time you've had it earning returns while I've been living in poverty." I stood up, smoothing my coat. "And I want you to understand that the mother who would have died for you died the day you handed me that eviction notice." "Mom, please. We can work this out. I'll sell the apartment, pay you back gradually." "Michael," I said quietly, heading toward the door, "you should probably call a lawyer. You're going to need one." As the elevator descended, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of standing up for myself. It was intoxicating. The legal proceedings moved faster than I had expected. Within a week of my confrontation with Michael, Mr. Patterson had assembled a case that seemed airtight. Bank records, forged documents, insurance claims for non-existent treatments. It painted a picture of systematic fraud that even the most creative defense attorney would struggle to explain away. But what I hadn't prepared for was Michael's counterattack. "Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Patterson said during our meeting the following Monday, "your son's lawyer has filed a motion claiming you were complicit in the fraud." I nearly dropped my coffee cup. "What do you mean complicit? They're arguing that no reasonable person would continue paying medical bills for 18 months without seeing any proof of treatment. They're suggesting you knew the bills were fake and participated in the insurance fraud knowingly. The audacity of it took my breath away. So now I'm the criminal? It's a desperate defense strategy, but it could complicate things. Mister?" Patterson pulled out a legal document thick enough to stop a bullet. "They're claiming you were a willing participant who only came forward when the scheme collapsed." I read through the accusations, each one more outrageous than the last. According to Michael's lawyer, I was a master manipulator who'd convinced my son to defraud insurance companies so we could split the profits. The loving mother narrative was just a cover story for a sophisticated criminal partnership. How can they prove something that isn't true? They don't have to prove it, Mrs. Thompson. They just have to create reasonable doubt. Mr. Patterson's expression was grim. "Your son's attorney is very good, and he's building a case that you were the mastermind behind everything. Based on what evidence?" "The fact that you never asked to see medical records directly, that you never accompanied him to treatments, that you sold your house and liquidated your retirement without requiring documentation of the medical expenses." He paused. From the outside, it could look like deliberate ignorance. I felt the walls closing in. So my trust in my son is now evidence of my criminal intent. I'm afraid that's exactly what they're arguing. The unfairness of it made me dizzy. I'd sacrificed everything out of love, and now that love was being twisted into evidence of criminal conspiracy. What do? We fight back. We document every conversation, every payment, every moment of genuine maternal concern. "Mister?" Patterson opened another file. "But there's something else you need to know. Your son has agreed to testify against you in exchange for a reduced sentence." The betrayal cut deeper than anything that had come before. Michael wasn't just stealing my money anymore. He was trying to send me to prison to save himself. He would do that. Apparently, his attorney has convinced him that painting you as the mastermind is his best chance at avoiding serious jail time. "Mister?" Patterson leaned forward. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to understand what we're facing. If a jury believes their story, you could be looking at federal fraud charges, carrying a potential sentence of 10 to 15 years. 15 years. At 62, that would be the rest of my functional life. I'd go into prison an elderly woman and come out broken if I came out at all. What does Michael get out of this deal? Probation and community service, plus restitution payments. Mr. Patterson's voice was carefully neutral. He'd keep his freedom while you pay for both of your supposed crimes. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of my son's final betrayal. It wasn't enough that he'd stolen my money and my home. Now he wanted to steal my freedom and leave me to rot in prison for crimes he'd committed. "Mr. Patterson," I said finally, "I need you to do something for me." "What do you need?" "I need you to dig deeper into Michael's life, his finances, his relationships, his activities during the time he was supposedly dying." I stood up, feeling a familiar anger crystallizing into something sharper and more focused. If my son wants to play hardball, he's about to learn that his mother didn't raise a victim. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that someone who could orchestrate an 18-month fraud scheme probably wasn't limiting his criminal activities to stealing from his mother. I gathered my purse and coat. "Find me everything, Mr. Patterson." Every financial irregularity, every suspicious relationship, every questionable decision Michael made during his fake illness. That could take weeks. Then we better get started. I paused at the door. Because if Michael thinks he can destroy my life and walk away free, he's about to discover just how wrong he can be. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Michael's ex-girlfriend Sarah, who turned out to be a real person after all, not a fake nurse, but a woman who dated my son during his supposed cancer treatment and had grown suspicious of his behavior. She called our office yesterday, Mr. Patterson explained during our emergency meeting. Apparently, she saw the news coverage of the fraud charges and realized she'd been dating a pathological liar for over a year. Clara Bennett was 28, worked as an actual nurse at City General Hospital, and had been seeing Michael for 14 months, right in the middle of his fake cancer timeline. She sat across from us in Mr. Patterson's office, nervous but determined. "I should have called sooner," she said, twisting her hands in her lap. "But Michael made me promise never to tell anyone about our relationship. He said his mother was overprotective and wouldn't understand him dating while he was sick." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. You knew he was supposedly sick. That's just it. He told me he was in remission. He said he'd beaten cancer, but still had to do maintenance treatments to make sure it didn't come back. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she talked, but there were so many things that didn't add up. Like what? Mr. Patterson had his notepad ready. He claimed to have chemotherapy appointments, but his hair never changed. His energy levels were fine. He never seemed sick after treatments. Sarah looked directly at me. "Mrs. Thompson, healthy people don't act the way Michael acted around you versus how he acted around me." "What do you mean with me?" "He was energetic, confident, always talking about his big plans and investments. But whenever you called, he'd put on this weak, tired voice. Sometimes he'd even lie down on the couch and mess up his hair before answering the phone." The image of my son deliberately staging his illness for my benefit made me feel sick. You saw him do this multiple times. I even asked him about it once, and he laughed it off, saying he didn't want to worry you by seeming too healthy too fast. Sarah pulled a manila envelope from her purse. But there's more. Michael didn't just lie about his health, he lied about his finances too. She spread out bank statements and credit card bills that painted a picture of reckless spending, far beyond what I'd been giving him. Designer clothes, expensive vacations, a Rolex that cost more than my car. Where was he getting this kind of money? Mr. Patterson asked. "That's what I want to know. His supposed medical bills from you were around $4,000 a month, but he was spending twice that on luxuries." Sarah pointed to a credit card statement showing an $8,000 charge at a jewelry store. "This was the week he told you he was too sick from chemotherapy to visit. I studied the dates, cross-referencing them with my own records of payments I'd made. Every time I'd written a check to help with his treatment, he'd gone on a shopping spree." Sarah said carefully, "Did Michael ever mention other sources of income?" He was vague about it, said he had some investments, some side businesses, but she hesitated, looking between Mr. Patterson and me. "I think he might have been running other scams." "What kind of scams?" "He had a lot of older friends, people he'd met through some volunteer group. He was always talking about how grateful they were for his help, how they insisted on giving him money even though he tried to refuse." Sarah's expression was troubled at the time. I thought it was sweet. "Now, I wonder if he was running the same con on multiple people." Mr. Patterson and I exchanged glances. If Michael had been scamming other elderly people while stealing from me, the federal charges would multiply exponentially. "Do you have names?" Mr. Patterson asked. "Some of them, and I might be able to get more." Sarah reached into her purse again and pulled out a phone. "I still have access to his social media accounts. He trusted me with his passwords." For the next hour, we went through Michael's digital life like archaeologists uncovering a lost civilization. What we found was a carefully constructed network of relationships with older, vulnerable people. People had convinced he was a struggling cancer patient who needed help. My God, I whispered, looking at message threads where Michael played the grateful, sick young man accepting loans from good-hearted seniors. How many people has he stolen from? At least 12 that I can see here, Sarah said. And these are just the ones who communicated through social media. Mr. Patterson was already reaching for his phone. This changes everything. We're not just looking at insurance fraud anymore. This is organized elder abuse on a massive scale. I watched my attorney call the FBI task force that handles financial crimes against seniors, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. This was about protecting other people like me from my son's calculated cruelty. Mrs. Thompson, Sarah said quietly while Mr. Patterson talked to federal agents, I want you to know I'm sorry. I should have seen through his lies sooner. You're not responsible for Michael's choices, I replied, but I'm grateful you came forward now. What's going to happen to him? I looked out the window at the city where my son had been living in luxury while his victims scraped by on Social Security and savings they'd never get back. Justice, I said simply. Finally, justice. The FBI raid on Michael's penthouse happened at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I was there to watch every single minute of it. Agent Eleanor Vance had invited me to observe from across the street, saying I deserved to see justice in action after what my son had put me through. Is it wrong that I'm enjoying this? I asked Agent Hayes as we watched federal agents carry boxes of evidence out of the building where Michael had been living on stolen money. Mrs. Thompson, you've earned the right to feel satisfaction, she replied. Your son victimized at least 15 elderly people. This is about more than personal revenge now. 15 people. The number had grown as the investigation expanded. Beatrice Chang, 73, who lost her late husband's life insurance money. Thomas Miller, 68, a retired teacher, who'd emptied his pension to help the sweet young man fighting cancer. Each story was a variation of mine. Vulnerable seniors targeted by someone who'd perfected the art of exploiting maternal and paternal instincts. How much did he steal in total? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Over $2 million across all victims. Agent Hayes handed me a coffee from the surveillance van. Your son wasn't just running a scam, Mrs. Thompson. He was operating a sophisticated criminal enterprise. $2 million. While I'd been living in a motel room, counting my last dollars, Michael had been masterminding a fraud scheme that would have impressed professional con artists. The boy I'd raised to return lost wallets had become someone who stole life savings from grandparents. My phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Patterson. Michael's attorney wants to meet, claims he has new information that changes everything. I showed the message to Agent Hayes, who frowned. That's interesting timing. We just executed the search warrant an hour ago. You think he's trying to cut a deal? Probably, but after what we found in his apartment this morning, I'm not sure any prosecutor would be interested in negotiating. What did you find? Agent Hayes pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of a notebook filled with handwritten pages. Your son kept detailed records of every victim, names, vulnerabilities, psychological profiles, even notes about which approaches worked best with different personality types. I stared at the image, recognizing Michael's neat handwriting. Under my name, he'd written, "Guilt-driven maternal instincts override logic. Responds well to medical crisis scenarios. Will sacrifice everything for family." Reading my own psychological profile, written by my son for the purpose of robbing me, felt like being dissected while still alive. He studied us, I said quietly, like lab rats. Mrs. Thompson, your son is a sociopath. This level of manipulation and planning isn't normal criminal behavior. It's pathological. Agent Hayes put her phone away. The good news is that this notebook essentially confesses to everything. He can't claim ignorance or accident when he documented his criminal intent in detail. What happens now? We finish processing the evidence, then present everything to the grand jury. With what we have, your son is looking at federal charges for wire fraud, mail fraud, elder abuse, and money laundering. She paused. We're talking about 25 to 30 years in federal prison. 25 to 30 years. Michael would be in his 60s when he got out, assuming he lived that long. Part of me felt sad about that, the part that remembered teaching him to ride a bike and helping with homework. But that part was getting smaller every day. Agent Hayes, I said, watching the last of the evidence boxes being loaded into government vehicles. I need to ask you something. Of course, when this goes to trial, Michael's going to try to paint me as a willing participant again. His lawyer will say I was too smart not to know what was happening. I turned to face her. Do you believe I was involved? Agent Hayes studied me for a long moment. Mrs. Thompson, I've been investigating financial crimes for 12 years. I've seen real criminal conspiracies between family members, and I've seen victims who were manipulated by people they trusted. She pointed toward the building where Michael lived. What happened to you wasn't complicity, it was abuse. How can you be sure? Because real criminals don't liquidate their own retirement accounts to fund schemes they're profiting from. Real criminals don't end up homeless and broke while their accomplices live in luxury. Agent Hayes smiled grimly. Your son's notebook actually helps your case. He wrote about manipulating your emotions and exploiting your trust. Those aren't the notes of someone working with a willing partner. For the first time in months, I felt like someone in authority actually understood what had happened to me. I wasn't a criminal or a fool. I was a victim of someone who'd weaponized my love against me. Mrs. Thompson, Agent Hayes said as we prepared to leave, there's something else you should know. Several of the other victims want to meet you. Meet me? Why? Because you're the reason we caught him. Your cooperation broke this case open. She handed me a business card. There's a support group forming for victims of family financial abuse. Beatrice Chang is organizing it. She specifically asked if you'd be interested in attending. I looked at the card, thinking about all those other people who trusted their maternal instincts and paid the price. Yes, I said. I'd like that very much. As we drove away from Michael's building, I realized something had changed in me during those hours of watching federal agents dismantle my son's criminal empire. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was determined. Determined to see justice done, determined to help other victims, and determined to rebuild a life that no one could steal from me again. Michael had taught me that trust could be weaponized. Now I was going to learn how to weaponize justice. Michael's lawyer, David Brennan, looked like he'd rather be defending anyone else on earth when we met in the federal courthouse conference room. His client's case had gone from a manageable fraud charge to a federal racketeering investigation, and the stress was showing. Mrs. Thompson, he began, my client would like to apologize for the pain he's caused you. Your client would like to avoid 30 years in federal prison, I replied. Let's not pretend this is about remorse. Mr. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. Michael has authorized me to offer full restitution to all victims, plus a formal apology and cooperation with ongoing investigations. In exchange for what? Agent Hayes asked. A plea agreement that reduces his sentence to 5 years with possibility of parole in 3. Brennan pulled out a document thick enough to choke a horse. He's prepared to plead guilty to all charges and provide information about other individuals who may be running similar schemes. I almost laughed. Other individuals? You mean the criminal network that exists only in your imagination? Mrs. Thompson, I understand you're angry. Mr. Brennan, I'm not angry. I'm educated. I pulled out my own folder, courtesy of Agent Hayes and the FBI investigation. Your client kept detailed records of his crimes. We know he worked alone. We know he targeted victims systematically. And we know he planned to blame me for everything when he got caught. Brennan's confident expression flickered. That was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I stood up, feeling every one of my 62 years settling into righteous fury. Your client wrote in his own handwriting that I was too trusting and easily manipulated through maternal guilt. That's not a misunderstanding, Mr. Brennan. That's a confession. My client was under tremendous stress. Your client was under the stress of counting stolen money. I leaned forward across the conference table. Mr. Brennan, let me explain something to you about mothers. We spend decades learning to read people's motivations, to spot lies, to protect our families from threats. The only reason your client succeeded in fooling me was because I never imagined the threat was sitting at my own dinner table. Agent Hayes cleared her throat. Mr. Brennan, your client's notebook contains detailed psychological profiles of 15 victims, including strategies for manipulating each one. The prosecution has handwriting experts who will testify that these notes were written over months, not days. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. It was a systematic, criminal enterprise. Brennan looked like a man watching his career prospects circle the drain. What would it take to consider a plea agreement? Nothing, I said simply. There is no plea agreement that gives me back 18 months of believing my son was dying. There is no deal that returns the house I inherited from my parents. There is no bargain that restores the retirement I'll never have now. Mrs. Thompson, Brennan tried again. Prison won't solve anything. Michael needs treatment, counseling, rehabilitation. Mr. Brennan, I interrupted. I spent 35 years providing my son with treatment, counseling, and rehabilitation. I gave him love, support, education, and every opportunity to become a decent human being. He chose to become a predator instead. I gathered my papers and stood up. The time for rehabilitation was before he stole $2 million from elderly people. Now it's time for consequences. Brennan looked desperately at Agent Hayes. Surely the government would prefer cooperation to a lengthy trial. Mr. Brennan, Agent Hayes replied, your client's own records provide all the evidence we need. We don't need his cooperation when we have his confession written in his own hand, she smiled coldly. Besides, this case is going to send a message to other potential criminals that targeting senior citizens carries serious consequences. A lengthy trial suits our purposes perfectly. As we left the conference room, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began: complete confidence in the outcome. Michael had been so arrogant, so sure of his superior intelligence, that he documented his own crimes in detail. He'd outsmarted himself right into a federal prison cell. Mrs. Thompson, Agent Hayes said as we walked toward the elevator, there's something you should know. Michael's been making calls from jail. To whom? Other inmates' families, mostly. He's been trying to start new sympathy scams from inside the county lockup. She shook her head in amazement. Your son appears to be physically incapable of honest behavior. I wasn't surprised. A man who could fake cancer for 18 months while watching his mother sacrifice everything wasn't going to suddenly develop a conscience in jail. Agent Hayes, I said as the elevator doors closed, I want to be there when the verdict comes in. Are you sure? Seeing your son sentenced to decades in prison won't be easy. Neither was selling my house to pay for fake chemotherapy, I replied. But I survived that. I'll survive this too. The difference was this time I wasn't surviving alone. I had Beatrice Chang and the other victims who'd become my unlikely family. I had Agent Hayes and the FBI task force who treated me like a person instead of a statistic. I had Mr. Gleddick, Patterson, who'd never charged me a fee because he said some cases were about justice instead of money. Most importantly, I had myself back, the woman who'd raised a son, buried a husband, and built a life worth stealing. Michael had taken my money and my house, but he hadn't taken my strength. That apparently was something even the most sophisticated criminal couldn't steal. The support group met every Thursday at the community center. And walking into that first meeting felt like entering a room full of mirrors. 15 faces, all showing variations of the same expression I'd been wearing for months. The look of people who'd discovered that trust could be a fatal flaw. Beatrice Chang, the woman who'd lost her husband's life insurance money to Michael's fake cancer story, had become our unofficial leader. At 73, she had the kind of sharp intelligence that made you wonder how anyone could have fooled her, until you remembered that intelligence meant nothing when someone weaponized your own compassion against you. "Margaret," she said, standing up to hug me like we were old friends instead of strangers, bonded by mutual betrayal. "I'm so glad you came." "Thank you for organizing this," I replied, looking around at the circle of chairs arranged in the church basement. "How many of us are there now?" 17 confirmed victims, but the FBI thinks there might be more. Dorothy's voice carried the same mixture of anger and sadness I heard in my own. Your son was very thorough in his research. As each person shared their story, I heard echoes of my own experience. Thomas Miller had met Michael at a senior center where my son had volunteered, supposedly to give back to the community while battling cancer. Eleanor Walsh had encountered him at a grocery store where he'd collapsed dramatically, and she'd driven him home only to be drawn into months of helping with medical expenses. "The thing that bothers me most," said Frank O'Brien, a retired postal worker who'd lost $80,000, "is how well he knew us. Not just our names or our finances, but our personalities. What would make us want to help?" "He studied us," I said, thinking about the notebook Agent Hayes had shown me. "He actually wrote down our psychological profiles." "What did yours say?" asked Eleanor. I closed my eyes, remembering the clinical language Michael had used to dissect my maternal instincts. Guilt-driven responds well to medical crisis scenarios. Will sacrifice everything for family. The room fell silent. Finally, Dorothy spoke. "Mine said, recent widow, strong caretaker instincts, feels guilty about husband's death, needs to feel useful." One by one, the others shared what they remembered from their own profiles found in Michael's apartment during the FBI raid. Each description was brutally accurate, reducing complex human beings to a list of exploitable weaknesses. "How did he know us so well?" Frank asked. "Because he spent months studying us before he made his move." I replied, "Agent Hayes told me he'd visit the same places repeatedly, watching people, listening to conversations, learning our routines and our vulnerabilities." "So we were marked," Eleanor said quietly, "like animals being hunted." "Yes," Dorothy said firmly, "but we survived, and now he's the one who's trapped." She was right. While we sat in a church basement rebuilding our lives and our trust in humanity, Michael was in a federal holding cell awaiting trial. The hunter had become the hunted. "There's something else," Dorothy continued. "The prosecutor's office called me this morning. They want some of us to testify at Michael's sentencing hearing." "To say what?" Robert asked. "To tell the judge how his crimes affected our lives, to put human faces on the financial damage." Dorothy looked directly at me. "Margaret, they specifically requested that you speak." I'd been dreading this moment since the investigation began. Standing up in court and describing my humiliation to a room full of strangers felt like being victimized all over again. "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "You don't have to," Dorothy said gently. "But think about this. Your testimony could ensure that Michael gets the maximum sentence. It could prevent him from hurting other people." And Frank added, "It gives you a chance to tell him exactly what you think of his choices." That night, I sat in my small apartment, the place I'd found after leaving the motel, modest but mine, and wrote down everything I wanted to say to my son. The letter grew to 12 pages before I was finished, filled with 35 years of love that had been repaid with calculated cruelty. But as I read it over, I realized something important. This wasn't really about Michael anymore. It was about every other potential victim out there, every other trusting parent or grandparent who might encounter the next sophisticated predator. I picked up my phone and called Dorothy. "I'll testify," I told her. "But not for revenge, for prevention." "What do you mean?" "I want other families to hear what happened to us. I want parents to know that their own children can become threats." I want the next Julian Vance to understand that targeting seniors isn't a victimless crime. It's an attack on people who've spent their lives contributing to society. Margaret Dorothy said, "I think you found your voice." She was right. For 62 years, I'd been someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother. Now, finally, I was going to be Eleanor Vance, a woman who refused to let evil disguise itself as family love. The trial was set to begin in 3 weeks. I had that long to prepare for the most important speech of my life. The federal courthouse buzzed with media attention on the morning of Michael's sentencing hearing. Apparently, a case involving a son who faked cancer to steal from his own mother had captured public imagination in a way that surprised everyone, including the prosecutors. Mrs. Thompson, Assistant U.S. Attorney Lisa Chen said as we prepared in the witness room, "Are you ready for this?" I smoothed my best dress, the navy blue one I'd worn to my husband's funeral 10 years ago, and nodded. "I've been ready for months." "Remember, you'll be speaking directly to Judge Morrison, not to your son. Focus on the impact of his crimes, not on your personal relationship." She paused, though I understand that's easier said than done. Through the window, I could see Michael sitting at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller than I remembered. His lawyer had insisted on a jury trial, apparently believing that 12 Americans would never convict someone's son for helping with medical bills, no matter what the evidence showed. He'd been wrong. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding Michael guilty on all counts. The notebooks full of victim profiles, the forged medical documents, the bank records showing luxury purchases funded by stolen money. It had painted a picture so damning that even his own mother would have voted to convict, which was exactly what I'd done when the prosecutor asked me to explain how Michael had manipulated my maternal instincts. "Mrs. Thompson," Judge Morrison called, "the court is ready for your victim impact statement." I walked to the podium, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. Michael looked up at me for the first time since his arrest, and I saw something that surprised me. Fear, not of prison, but of what I might say about him in front of all these people. "Your Honor," I began, "my name is Eleanor Vance, and I'm here to speak for 17 victims who trusted someone we thought we knew." I'd practiced this speech for weeks, but standing there with my son 20 feet away, the words took on a power I hadn't expected. Julian Vance isn't just a criminal who stole money. He's a predator who studied elderly people like laboratory animals, learning our weaknesses so he could exploit our strengths. I pulled out the notebook page Agent Hayes had given me. This is my psychological profile written in my son's handwriting. It reduces 35 years of maternal love to a list of exploitable vulnerabilities. I read Michael's clinical assessment of my character, watching the faces of the jurors who remained to hear sentencing. Several looked disgusted. One woman was crying. "Your Honor, the financial damage is obvious and measurable. I lost my house, my retirement, my security. Beatrice Chang lost her late husband's life insurance money. Thomas Miller emptied his pension account." I looked directly at Michael, but the emotional damage is harder to calculate. How do you measure the value of trust? How do you price the ability to believe that people are fundamentally good? How do you compensate someone for losing faith in their own judgment? Michael's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. But my son himself sat perfectly still, staring at the table in front of him. "Your Honor, I want to be clear about something. I'm not here asking for vengeance against my son. I'm here asking for justice for 17 seniors who committed the crime of caring about someone else's suffering." I paused, feeling the power of my own words. We're told that America respects its elders, that we value the contributions of people who've worked and saved and built this country. Julian Vance's crimes are an attack on those values. But here's what I want everyone in this courtroom to understand, I continued, my voice growing stronger. We survived. We found each other. We refused to let shame and embarrassment keep us isolated. I looked at Dorothy, Robert, Eleanor, and Frank, who'd come to support me. We turned our victimization into advocacy. Your Honor, Julian Vance stole our money, but he couldn't steal our resilience. He exploited our trust, but he couldn't destroy our capacity for justice. He tried to make us ashamed of our compassion, but instead he taught us how powerful we really are. I turned back to my son, meeting his eyes for what I knew would be the last time. Michael, you taught me something I never wanted to learn. That evil can wear a familiar face. My voice was steady, controlled. But you also taught me that I'm stronger than I ever imagined, that survival is possible, that justice, even delayed, is still justice. Your Honor, I said, turning back to Judge Morrison, I ask you to sentence Julian Vance not just for what he did to us, but for what he represents, the betrayal of trust, the exploitation of love, and the predatory targeting of vulnerable people who deserved protection, not predation. As I walked back to my seat, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete peace. I'd said everything that needed to be said. The rest was up to justice. Judge Morrison sentenced Michael to 28 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led him away, he turned back once, looking for me in the gallery. I was looking right back at him. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I wasn't the one who looked away first. 6 months after Michael's sentencing, I stood in the kitchen of my new house. Not a mansion, but a real home, with 2 bedrooms and a garden where I could grow tomatoes again, reading a letter that had arrived that morning. Dear Mrs. Thompson, it began, written in handwriting I barely recognized as my son's. I know I have no right to contact you, and I know you probably won't believe anything I say, but I need to try to explain what happened, even if you never forgive me. I almost threw the letter away. Almost. But something made me keep reading. I didn't start out planning to hurt you. I know that sounds impossible to believe now, but it's true. When I was first diagnosed with the small tumor, I was terrified. Not just of cancer, but of being poor, of being seen as weak, of losing everything I'd worked for. When you offered to help with medical bills, it felt like a lifeline. But then the tumor was removed successfully, and I should have told you everything was fine. Instead, I panicked. I'd already accepted money from you, and I was afraid you'd be angry that I'd taken it when I didn't really need it. So I lied. Just once, I told myself, just until I could pay you back. But lies have a way of growing, and the longer I waited, the harder it became to tell the truth. Then I realized how easy it was to manipulate people's sympathy. And something broke inside me. I set the letter down, pouring myself coffee before continuing. Even in prison, even after everything, Michael was still making excuses. I know you won't believe this, but I convinced myself I was helping you feel useful. You'd been so lost after Dad died, and caring for me seemed to give you purpose. I told myself you were happier feeling needed, even if the need was fake. I was wrong about everything. I see that now. The prison psychologist says I have something called narcissistic personality disorder, mixed with sociopathic tendencies. Apparently, I've been incapable of seeing other people as real human beings with their own feelings and rights. You were just a resource to me, not a person. Mom, I know this is too little, too late. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't give you back your house or your retirement or the 18 months you spent thinking your son might die. But I need you to know that I understand what I took from you now. The other inmates here know what I did. They have mothers, too, and they don't like men who steal from their families. I've learned what it feels like to be vulnerable, to be afraid, to have no one to trust. I think maybe that's what justice looks like. I don't expect you to write back. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you raised a son who was capable of understanding right and wrong. I chose wrong over and over, but I still know the difference. That's something, I guess. I hope you're happy, Mom. I hope you found peace. You deserve everything good in life, and I'm sorry I stole so much of it from you. Love, Michael. P.S. Agent Hayes told my lawyer that you started a foundation to help other victims of family financial abuse. I'm proud of you for that. It's exactly the kind of thing the real Eleanor Vance would do. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with other papers I might need someday, but didn't want to look at regularly. The foundation Michael mentioned, the Thompson Foundation for Family Financial Safety, had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when Dorothy and I first conceived it. We'd helped 43 families recover from financial abuse by relatives, provided legal assistance to elderly fraud victims, and lobbied for stronger penalties for crimes targeting seniors. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. "Margaret, it's Dorothy. Are you ready for the television interview this afternoon?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. The local news station wanted to do a follow-up story about our foundation, and they'd specifically requested that I tell our story on camera. Any second thoughts about going public? I looked around my kitchen at the photos of my new family, the support group members who'd become my closest friends, Agent Hayes, who still called to check on me, even Mr. Patterson, who'd refused payment but accepted an invitation to our monthly dinners. "No second thoughts?" I said. "If telling our story prevents one other family from going through this, it's worth it." That afternoon, sitting under television lights with a reporter asking me to describe the worst period of my life, I realized something profound had happened. The shame and embarrassment I'd carried for months had transformed into purpose. "Mrs. Thompson," the reporter asked, "what would you say to other families who might be facing similar situations?" "I'd say that love doesn't require you to be stupid, and trust doesn't mean accepting everything without question." I looked directly into the camera. If someone you love is asking for money, especially large amounts, it's okay to ask for proof. It's okay to verify medical bills. It's okay to protect yourself, even from family. And what about forgiveness? Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive your son? I thought about Michael's letter, about the man who'd written it from a federal prison cell, finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd done. Forgiveness isn't about them, I said finally. It's about us. I've forgiven the part of me that ignored red flags because I wanted to be a good mother. I've forgiven myself for being human. As for Michael, forgiveness is something he'll have to earn, not something I owe him. "What's next for you?" I smiled, thinking about the garden I was planning, the foundation work that gave my life meaning, the community of survivors who'd become my chosen family. "Next, I live," I said simply. I live fully, carefully, and on my own terms. After 62 years of being defined by my relationships to other people, I'm finally learning how to be Eleanor Vance. As the camera crew packed up their equipment, Dorothy appeared with a bottle of champagne. "For surviving," she said, "and for thriving." "For thriving," I agreed, clinking glasses with the woman who'd become my best friend through shared trauma and mutual determination. Outside my kitchen window, the tomatoes I'd planted were beginning to ripen. Simple, honest growth in soil that belonged to me, in a life that no one could steal. It was enough. It was everything. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.